Good morning. It's May 2nd here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the Japanese Prime Minister's visit to Seoul this weekend. The Japanese leader Fumio Kishida told reporters that he's planning a two-day visit from Sunday. Details are expected to be announced today. JPMorgan Chase has taken over First Republic Bank. The new owner says this part of the crisis is over. Over in France, nearly 300 people have been arrested during violent May Day protests, opposing unpopular legal reform that raises the retirement age from 62 to 64. Our top story this morning, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida told reporters just hours ago that he is arranging a two-day visit to South Korea from Sunday. His Seoul trip will mark the official resumption of the so-called shuttle diplomacy, regular visits to each other's countries. Our Han Sang-woo starts us off.
Seoul and Tokyo are in the final stages of negotiating a summit between South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Seoul this Sunday, May 7th. That's according to a senior official from South Korea's top office, who said that Tokyo had wanted Prime Minister Kishida to make a trip to Seoul since quite a while ago. Contrary to some observations that his visit would take place around the summer, it's been said that South Korea and Japan had already started negotiations for an earlier summit even before President Yoon's state visit to the United States late last month. The two countries are reportedly discussing terms to simultaneously announce the upcoming summit on Tuesday. And if it happens, it would mark the first time a Japanese prime minister visits South Korea in 5 years. Considering it would be held just over 50 days after their summit in Tokyo, South Korea is viewing it as the complete resumption of regular reciprocal trips, or what the two nations' leaders called shuttle diplomacy. Kishida's upcoming visit will come before South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. likely join forces for a trilateral summit in a few weeks on the sidelines of the 49th G7 summit in Hiroshima, to which Yoon was invited by Kishida back in March. It's still being arranged, but the three nations are expected to discuss security cooperation against North Korea's nuclear threats. Some diplomatic sources are even projecting a trilateral consultative body on extended deterrence to be newly launched, but according to a senior South Korean official, negotiations on that haven't begun yet. The latest developments come just days after Yoon and U.S. President Joe Biden signed the Washington Declaration to further strengthen the ironclad ROK-U.S. alliance, a move that has angered not just Pyongyang, but also Beijing and Moscow. China and Russia's foreign ministries have claimed the new accord destabilizes regional security and increases tensions. Han Sang-woo, Arirang News.
National Security Advisor Cho Tae-yong says Japanese PM's visit to Seoul would signify two things: the early normalization of the two nations' regular reciprocal trips between leaders, and a chance to discuss issues ahead of the G7 summit. Speaking to YTN on Monday, Cho added that the date of the summit will be announced once an agreement is reached. As for whether the Japanese PM should apologize to the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor, the official refrained from giving a clear stance, rather stressing the importance of a balance between the past and present, while hinting at a possible three-way summit between South Korea, the U.S. and Japan at the G7 summit. Joe dismissed reports about Japan's involvement in the Seoul-Washington nuclear consultative body. The U.S. has stressed its nuclear partnership with South Korea under the Washington Declaration is aimed at enhancing deterrence against North Korea's provocations, countering criticisms from Pyongyang and Beijing. A U.S. State Department spokesperson made the remarks in a press briefing on Monday, adding that the two allies are open for engaging in diplomacy and dialogue with the North based on the common goal of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. Now, as for China's criticism, despite having been briefed about the plan in advance, the spokesperson said China shouldn't be overacting. Previously, China denounced the Washington Declaration for raising tensions, and North Korea slammed it for legally justifying U.S. deployment of strategic assets on the peninsula. President Yoon's state visit to the U.S. last week was more than a diplomatic event that celebrated 70 years of friendship between Seoul and Washington. It was more of a chance for the two allies also to expand their traditional security alliance to a cultural alliance. For more on this, we're joined by Mr. Jason Veshervase. He's a film critic and also a visiting professor at Korea University. Welcome back to the program.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Good morning. First off, what do you think was the most fruitful outcome in terms of culture and the media content industry from Yoon's state visit? How has South Korea proved itself during his trip in terms of K-culture being taken to a global level?
Well, yeah, obviously, you've got the news that Netflix is investing $2 billion in Korean content, which is hugely significant. You know, they've announced over the last few years quite a lot of money that they've put into K content since, 2016, well over $1 billion. And so this is not only is this a continuation of that, but we're seeing even more money pumped into the K content industry. I think we're going to see more shows following the success of Squid Game, of course, other series, including The Glory. And I think it's interesting that Yoon Suk-yeol has kind of met the head of a American streaming giant. Not here, it's not a Korean streaming service. And over the past 3 decades, the Korean government has actively supported the local industry in various different ways. You've got the Korean Film Council, of course. And so what we have here is a Korean president in the United States meeting with effectively a United States or US studio. So now this also helps the Korean content industry in that obviously these are Korean shows where Netflix collaborate with Korean partners, Korean production companies. You've got Korean directors, Korean writers. So it does, of course, help the Korean industry. But I do think it goes to show how it's continued to evolve and how this is a kind of win-win, so to speak. It helps Netflix, but it also helps the K content industry. Although, of course, there are issues with that, given the popularity of streaming services, with cinemas somewhat struggling at the moment.
Right, definitely a win-win situation there. Now, staying with President Yoon Suk-yeol, he also vowed to get rid of regulations on the culture and movie industries if they don't meet global standards. Now, what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean for K content as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see how, the K content industry is, continuing to evolve and how, you're looking at the global standards and also regulations. And I think at the moment there's been talk of, looking at the film industry and how there are regulations involved to try. Well, there was talk of trying to add a cap on the number of screens a film was released on, although that never came to fruition because of the pandemic. But I think at the moment, it's there are various factors in play that have allowed the industry to succeed on the global stage. And I don't think there's much in the way of regulations that's preventing the Korean industry from performing very well domestically and internationally. But I think it's interesting that he's actually stated that.
Right. And let's also talk about the new investment deals. You briefly mentioned Netflix investing in Korea $2.5 billion for the next 4 years. Now, some watchers are saying that it's not enough. What do you think? Is it really not enough? How is the new investment deal notable in any way?
Well, I hadn't actually read the reports that stated it wasn't enough. I think, looking now at maybe some of the issues with regards to this investment, I've touched on this. Because, if you're investing $2.5 billion in Korean content, Netflix Korean content, that obviously puts Netflix in a very powerful position, and they're currently leading the industry. So, Korea's always had this somewhat ambivalent relationship, with the Hollywood kind of companies or studios. On the one hand, admiring content that's come out of the United States, and certainly being influenced by American filmmakers, but on the other hand, wary of its presence. And I think Netflix is, such a massive presence in the industry. And in a sense, it's different compared to, a decade ago, where you've got American companies in Korea distributing American and in some cases Korean films, but not to the extent that's happening at the moment, on Netflix's streaming service. So I think there will be those in the industry that are somewhat worried about Netflix's presence and asking whether actually, whether this is a good thing for the Korean content industry. So, investing huge amounts of money in K content, yes, that's a good thing. But it could also mean that, there might be some pushback from some local players who would argue that Netflix is getting too big and too quickly. Any healthy ecosystem will have, a variety of different players. And that is true at the moment. But the concern is that because there's so much money being invested in Korean shows, that you have this production bubble and it just inflates and inflates, and then it just bursts. And that's kind of what happened in the mid to late 2000s in the Korean film industry, where there were just too many films being made, too much money being pumped into K movies, and there wasn't enough money for those films to kind of generate revenue from cinema admissions, and as a result, the bubble burst. So I think there is a danger that would happen, and we'll have to wait and see. And I suspect what will happen is there'll be a consolidation, so a process of consolidation. We're in a kind of period of transition right now, so you're going to see, some of these big players. You've got Netflix, and there are also some big local players. You've got CJ, you've got the Jungan Group as well, with Megabox and JTBC. And I imagine what will happen is you'll have the bigger players consuming some of the smaller players, or at least collaborating with them.
Right. Lots of exciting and collaborative projects that we all can look forward to.
I hope so. Yeah, there's quite a few coming out over the next few weeks. I mean, Netflix have got DP season 2. Season 1 was very well received when it was released just a few weeks before. Squid Game didn't take off internationally, but it was certainly a show that even politicians are talking about. So that's out this year. It deals with the military service. There's also Marskill, which is another Netflix show. There's a Bloody Lucky Day, which is a Paramount and TV series. Was about a taxi driver who comes up against a serial killer. That's directed by Pil Kam-sung, who made Missing Celebrity. And so we're seeing a number of kind of Korean filmmakers working on Korean shows. There's Park In-jae, who is also a filmmaker. He's directing Moving, which is Disney Plus's big show, budgeted at 50 billion won, the most expensive show in K content history. So lots going on. It's also worth mentioning films as well. You've got Yoo Seung-won's Smugglers that's coming out in the summer. You've got Kim Sung-eun's Ransomed that's also coming out this summer. It's shot in the Middle East, and that's continuing a trend that we've seen in the Korean film industry with films such as Point Men and Escape from Mogadishu that were set in that part of the world. We've got the Cannes films, of course. I haven't even mentioned those yet. We've got Project Silence that's screening in midnight, featuring Lee Sung-gun. I think that'll be quite interesting to see, kind of continuing this trend of disaster films in Korea following Exit, and others as well. emergency declaration. There's Sleep as well, also starring Lee Sung-gyun, and also Jung Yoo-mi. I'm really intrigued to see that, directed by Bong Joon-ho's former assistant Jason Kim. So yeah, no, I'm very very excited about the number of Korean films that are coming out over the next Korean films, and also series, of course, that are coming out over the next few weeks. And of course, Kim Ji-yoon's Cobweb as well, which starring Song Kang-ho, set in the 1970s, and there are some similarities, I believe, to the director Kim Ki-young. So yeah, lots going on.
I thought I already had a long watch list, but thanks for adding some to my list on top of those.
Absolute pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, over in the United States, the troubled First Republic Bank has now been taken over by JPMorgan Chase. First Republic is the third U.S. bank to fall victim to the recent banking crisis, but there are hopes that this takeover will bring the crisis to an end. Our Song Yujin has the details.
San Francisco-based First Republic Bank, which had been the 14th biggest commercial bank in the U.S. last year, has been sold to banking giant JPMorgan Chase after being taken over by financial regulators. On Monday local time, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation announced that it has seized First Republic and that JPMorgan Chase will be purchasing all of the troubled bank's deposits and assets. According to the FDIC, as of April 13th, First Republic had approximately $229.1 billion in total assets and $103.9 billion in total deposits. Following the announcement, U.S. President Joe Biden greatly welcomed the deal.
I'm pleased to say that the regulators have taken action to facilitate the sale of First Republic Bank and ensure that all depositors are protected and the taxpayers are not on the hook.
This comes a few days after First Republic reported losing about 40% of its deposits in the first quarter of this year. Depositors started losing confidence in the bank, pulling out their money after witnessing the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in March. Despite a $30 billion rescue package from 11 banks in mid-March, the situation worsened, with the bank's stock falling more than 75% last week. After a rocky few months for the U.S. banking sector, JPMorgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon told analysts over the phone that though there are chances that another smaller bank may fail, Monday's takeover has pretty much ended the current banking crisis. With Monday's takeover, all 84 First Republic offices across 8 U.S. states are reopening as JPMorgan branches. 송유진, Arirang News.
IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said Monday that global economic growth remains at a historically low level, but called on central banks to keep interest rates tight to a point where they can keep inflation down. Speaking at the Milken Institute Global Conference 2023, Georgieva noted that global inflation is expected to rise to 7%, while global economic growth this year will be at 2.8%. She added that the global economy will grow at around 3% per year for the next 5 years. The IMF chief also pointed out that the vulnerability of the financial sector was exposed due to a sharp transition from low interest rates to high interest rates. The La Niña climate pattern will finally come to an end this month after 3 years of unusually long period. But the end of the La Niña will be followed by the start of El Niño, which experts say will lead to even harsher summer weather ahead. Our Lee Seung-ja with more.
Roads flooded by record-breaking rainfall in Pakistan. Entire villages in Germany covered in driftwood and garbage after the country's biggest rainfall in 100 years. India seeing temperatures close to 50 degrees Celsius in the month of April. All of this as a result of an unusually long period of the La Niña, oceanic and atmospheric climate pattern that has lasted for 3 years. La Niña refers to the periodic cooling of ocean surface temperatures in the central and east-central equatorial Pacific that usually lasts for 9 to 12 months, but the recent cycle started in August 2020. And as such, the heat imbalance spreading from oceans into the atmosphere can cause global disasters. While weather experts have predicted a transition to the El Niño climate pattern in June, the phenomenon is set to begin a month earlier as the water temperature in the monitoring area rose sharply last month. And according to simulations, by September, water temperatures could rise by more than 1.5 degrees compared to a normal year, resulting in a stronger El Niño. Weather experts in South Korea are closely monitoring the effects of the new El Niño cycle. When El Niño develops during the summer season, the expansion of the high pressure that drives the heat in Korea is delayed. This means the rainy season and intense heat also start late, and southern regions could see frequent heavy rain. And now, what seemed to be an end of unusual weather patterns due to the prolonged La Niña could actually be the beginning of more unsettled weather ahead of the start of El Niño. 이승재, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in France, where nearly 300 people have been arrested amid violent May Day protests opposing the French government's plan to increase the retirement age. At least 108 police officers have been injured, while the number of protesters injured is still unknown. The protests took place on International Workers' Day on May. Now, France's Interior Ministry says almost 800,000 people took to the streets nationwide, but labor groups claim the number is 3 times higher. While most protests in the country were peaceful, some saw the use of petrol bombs and fireworks, with protesters setting vehicles alight and attacking businesses. The protests follow months of strikes against the retirement age increasing from 62 to 64. The French government says the measure is needed to address a pension funding deficit. Moving over to Sudan, the United Nations said on Monday that the conflict-ridden country could see over 800,000 people flee amid prolonged battles between warring military factions. The UN estimates that 580,000 of the refugees will be Sudanese citizens, with the rest made up of foreign refugees who had previously arrived in Sudan. It added they may flee into 7 neighboring countries. So far, at least 73,000 people have already fled, with 40,000 crossing into Egypt. Fighting between troops from the Sudanese military and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has continued for over 2 weeks, leaving hundreds dead and thousands more wounded. The conflict between the groups has continued despite a number of internationally brokered ceasefire agreements. Now, legendary rock band Aerosmith has announced its final tour. The 4-time Grammy Award-winning band said Monday it will perform at 40 locations in North America as part of its Peace Out tour. According to lead guitarist Joe Perry, it's time to say goodbye after 50 years of making music together. The tour will include the original lineup, with the exception of drummer Joey Kramer. Formed in 1970 in Boston, Aerosmith was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2001. The band has sold over 150 million albums, conducted 10 world tours, and is known for hits such as Don't Want to Miss a Thing and Dream On. The tour kicks off on September 2nd in Philadelphia, with the final concert on January 26th in Montreal, Canada.
Good morning. If you liked yesterday's weather, you will enjoy today's as well. It's just the big temperature differences between the morning and afternoon that are causing many people to come down with a cold. And again, gaps will be as wide as 15 degrees Celsius in many parts of the country. Top readings will hover around 25 degrees this afternoon. We'll have full sunshine nationwide with decent air quality. Please don't forget your sunblock and sunglasses. UV rays will be high to very high across Korea during the day. Meanwhile, a dry weather advisory remains in place in the east of Gangwon-do and has been expanded to Daewon-seop, Gyeongsang-buk-do province. Making matters worse, the regions under the dry advisory will be windy as well. Please be careful with anything that could cause a fire. Another fine late spring day is in the forecast for tomorrow. Then the rain starts from Jeju tomorrow night before spreading nationwide by Thursday. And sadly, Children's Day on Friday looks to be a rainy one for most of us. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world. Like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city. Transforming our world, navigating toward a better future. World Expo 2030, Busan, Korea.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's May 2nd here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Choi Ji-hee.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Cheska Dainong.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. Let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, Italy has decided to allow people to use ChatGPT again. Italian regulators blocked the site at the end of March, raising concerns about how the chatbot processes and safeguards user data. But after its creator OpenAI implemented changes to its data privacy conditions, Italy has given ChatGPT the green light. Moving on to the second one, Japan's health ministry has approved an abortion pill to become available for the first time ever. Currently, Japan allows abortion for people who are up to 22 weeks pregnant. Surgical procedures were only available, but since the ministry's decision in late April, a two-step treatment drug can be used to terminate early-stage pregnancies, specifically those up to 9 weeks. And 50/50, a rookie girl group who debuted last November, is breaking global records. Global digital music streaming service Spotify said the group's song Cupid Twin version hit number 5 in the daily top songs in the world. It's the first time a girl group from a relatively small entertainment agency has swept the global charts like this. The only K-pop groups that have achieved this on Spotify is Blackpink, BTS, and New Jeans. Now let's take a closer look at the third news item. It's not the first time 50/50 has actually shaken up the global music industry. Just last week, 50/50 stayed within the Billboard Hot 100 Songs chart with its single Cupid for the 5th consecutive week. The group also formed a partnership with Warner Records, one of the biggest record labels in the States, to extend its presence in the North American market. And many netizens are trying to analyze the secret behind this group's popularity, especially since it's been produced by a relatively low-key agency called Attract that mostly has experience in creating content. So here in the studio, what do you guys think is making this girl group so popular?
I think, as we just heard from the song that was playing in the background, it is extremely catchy.
It is.
And I think it definitely catch the attention of many TikTok users, as we know. So it's trending very high in international media. So this is what we call the reverse imported, where it becomes really popular globally, and then now it's trending back in South Korea. But also, when we heard the song, for me, it was very tropical. So it kind of puts you in a very happy, sort of like a light vibe. And also the lyrics being English, I think, caught the attention of the global
Exactly.
users.
A lot of people who heard this song were like, oh, this sounds like popular pop songs around the world. But what were your thoughts, Chihi? Why do you think it's so popular?
I believe it's because it focused solely on the quality of the music as well. I mean, when I first listened to the song, I was pretty surprised at the intro part because it didn't sound like a typical idol group
Yeah,
music.
a typical K-pop idol
song. Not that they're not good, but it sounded pretty different.
Right.
And it wasn't promoted that actively, which is why not many people in the country knew about the music unless before it got reverse imported and got popular again here. And the producer, An Sung-il, he explained that he wanted to focus on the musical talent and the skills of the individual members a lot more and made sure that the unique characteristics of all the members were kind of presented in the music. And he also focused more on the US market in the beginning and made sure that the band can really have a competitive edge that's different from the typical K-idol groups.
Right, and that's why if you go to YouTube and look at all their music videos, you can see most of the comment sections are written in English or other different languages around the world. That's how popular globally they are. And that was our news feed for this Tuesday. Moving on to today's discussion topic. In bustling cities like Seoul, it may be difficult to get around, especially during rush hour. That's why a lot of people have been using e-scooters or electric scooters, but not everyone knows what regulations or safety guidelines they have to follow, which causes many safety hazards. To find out more, take a look at the screen. From September, you won't be seeing people riding electric scooters in Paris anymore. That's because majority of Parisians voted to remove them from the streets. Mainly because a lot of people flouted the rules of the road and ended up causing a safety hazard. Last year alone, 3 people died and 459 were injured from e-scooter accidents. E-scooters have posed a safety concern here in Korea as well. Over the past 5 years, the number of teen riders who've ended up in accidents has jumped by 46 times. Most rode these scooters without a driver's license, which is illegal. NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions today. 1. It seems many young people are using e-scooters. Why? 2. How is South Korea regulating this popular transport method among millennials and Gen Z? 3. What measures do we need to see further strengthened? So today we'll be talking about a popular mode of transport among young people, e-scooters. So here in the studio, are you guys a big fan of e-scooters, and how many people, specifically young ones, tend to ride them?
So as of last year, September, there were about 230,000 rental scooters that were available in South Korea, and the sales have been going up almost twice year on year.
Wow.
So it is becoming extremely popular in South Korea at the moment, as we can see just by the figures. And I'm sure we've seen a lot of youngsters riding on the road, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But for me particularly, I rode it first actually in LA.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it made sense at the time because it was a city where, much like Seoul, you really can't travel very well without cars. And the roads were a little wider than Seoul City, so I felt safer riding it. But in Seoul City, I've ridden it. But I do admit there are some downsides to it as well.
There are, and I can agree to this because I've actually ridden these e-scooters myself, and I feel like I know the rules. You have to wear a helmet, you can be on the road.
Yeah.
But the cars behind me started honking, saying, what are you doing here? Because like the maximum speed limit is like around 30 kilometers per hour.
You can't go any faster if you want to.
I know, and they're like honking in rush hour, and I was like, okay, this is not for me then. And then that's why I started to decide to walking around instead. But what about you, T? Do you have any experience?
I can totally feel you because I'm not a frequent user. I only rode it about 3 times.
Oh, really?
Yes, and the 2 times was before we were penalized for not wearing a helmet. But then I found it kind of a hassle to really register for the different apps of these scooters, and also you have to carry a helmet around. And once you register, you have to take a photo of your driver's license. You have to add in your credit card information. It's such a hassle. And a helmet. I mean, how can you carry a helmet around just for that one ride?
Right.
But I heard that you have a portable helmet. Unless you have a portable one that's foldable too.
Are you gonna take it out underneath? Like,
roller skater. She has a portable helmet.
Okay, for those of you who don't know, I am a roller skater and I always bring my portable helmet around. I'm like the advocate of it. You can fold it around, put it in your bag. It's really nice.
Yeah, but unless you have one, I don't.
Okay.
And also the roads here in Seoul are very narrow, bumpy, hilly, so it's really difficult and dangerous to ride these frequently, I believe.
You know what, Chihi, I'll lend you my portable helmet. I think then you would be able to ride these e-scooters. But because we're seeing a growing number of people, especially young ones, even without a license, start riding these e-scooters, we've seen a lot of related accidents over the past few years, right?
Right. So e-scooters in the city are dubbed the beasts of Seoul. Yes, as a growing number of consumers in the country are using the personal mobility option to commute to work daily. These traffic accidents involving e-scooters have increased in Korea in recent years. So as you can see through the chart on the screen, the number of accidents doubled every year and increased by 15 times within just 4 years. Now, over the past 5 years, some 4,000 people were injured and 45 died from these accidents. However, considering some minor accidents that are not reported to the authorities, the actual number could be even higher.
For sure, these figures could be higher. And now let's hear from a lawyer who has some expertise in traffic and road regulations to see how South Korea and other countries can regulate e-scooter riders and ensure safer roads. We're now going to hear from Kwon Hyuk-sung, a lawyer in South Korea. Welcome, Hyuk-sung.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
All right, and Hyuk-sung, I would like to ask how many e-scooter accidents occur every year, and which country has the most accidents per year? Is there some data on this?
Well, it's difficult to tell exact numbers of e-scooter accidents on a global scale because the number of e-scooter accidents varies greatly depending on the countries and regions. But in general terms, the United States and some Western European countries and other parts of Asia have experienced a significant number of e-scooter accidents nowadays. However, it is obvious that in many places, e-scooter usage has grown rapidly, which has led to an increase in accidents. Also, accidents related to personal mobility, including e-scooters, are becoming more and more severe. Well, in case of South Korea, as you all have discussed earlier, well, according to the announcements from related government offices, the number of traffic accidents caused by personal mobility devices, including e-scooter, rose sharply from 225 in 2018 to 1,735 in 2021. Well, in particular, the usage and accident rates are highest among the 10 to 20 age group who have a relative lack of safety education and driving experience.
For sure. It's really sad to see that a lot of youngsters are vulnerable to these types of e-scooter accidents. But then, what are some regulations to prevent accidents like this in Korea? Could you, as a lawyer, based on your expertise, explain how strict the penalties are?
Sure. As e-scooter accidents have become more serious issues in South Korea, there has been a growing call for measures such as safety campaigns, urging proper regulations to be developed to address this issue. Well, actually, as a result, a new regulation was adopted a few years ago regarding the e-scooter. First, as you have discussed earlier, you need a license to drive an e-scooter. Since the license is only available for those 16 years and older, you can drive an e-scooter from high school and above. Next, you should wear proper protection equipment, including helmets. Drivers of e-scooters and other vehicles should wear a suitable safety helmet when driving on the road. Also, you should wear luminous devices such as reflective belts and lights. Drivers of e-scooters must turn on the headlights and tail lights or wear luminous devices when driving on the road at night. And finally, you are forbidden to drive carrying other people. No more than 2 people drive the same e-scooter at the same time. Well, despite all of these regulations, few people comply or even know there are such regulations for e-scooter. If you do violate these regulations, in most cases, you will get fined, probably from $10 to $30. There are no criminal penalties, which is, in my opinion, much weaker compared to other countries like France or US.
Right.
So it sounds like regulations must be put in place and efforts must be made from 2 sides, the individual level and the government level.
For sure.
Yes, so, and I agree with how there should be safety campaigns to make sure that users and other bus drivers or taxi drivers, car drivers know that these e-scooters must be only on road, because Yeon, you said the bus
they don't know.
driver didn't know.
Drivers were honking at me because, as you mentioned, they didn't know what the regulations were. And as you also mentioned, South Korea does seem to have relatively lenient rules against how they should penalize people who go against any regulations. But Paris, France, has actually decided to ban e-scooters as a whole. And as a lawyer, do you think this is the best way we could go?
Well, I think it's a common example of the development of new technology and industries always brings conflicts with existing establishments. The regulation regarding the e-scooter controversy are no exception. So we all understand people's worry about road safety regarding the e-scooter. Well, in that case, I believe the road safety is important and appropriate regulations are required. However, in my opinion, a complete ban on e-scooters like in Paris is a bit excessive in the case of South Korea. It could depress the development of related industries. So it seems important to find a balance between promoting the development of new technology and business sectors while creating a safe environment through effective regulations and proper education as well.
Hyuk-sung, I think you brought up a really good point, because sometimes when we take these radical measures of completely banning something before we take the time to actually renovate what we can, it can actually halt any sort of development and usage in our society.
Definitely. That was a very good point. Thank you so much, Hyuk-sung. It was great to hear from you today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and based on our conversation with Hyuk-sung just now, what do you guys think about the last question? Do you think South Korea should ban e-scooters completely like Paris?
I thought we should consider banning them, just like Paris, but after listening to Mr. Kwon, I feel like it could be a little excessive.
You have been persuaded.
Yes, I've been persuaded.
You have been lawyered.
I have been persuaded, I have to admit. I think striking a balance would be important, because individuals, their convenience is important, but other people's safety is also important, right? And this industry has become huge, so it could depress the industry as well. So I believe we should have a balance of the regulations as well as the education for the users for us to make sure that these e-scooters could stay with us longer.
All right, what about you, Cheska? Were you lawyered?
I mean, I was already with Mr. Kwon. But I do agree that this is a very debatable topic, because the pros and cons are extremely clear. I mean, the cons are the safety of the people, not only using it, but the people who are affected by it, right? The pedestrians, myself included, and us. But also, given the society that we live in with, as you know, heavy congestion, rush hours, people all commuting at the same time in a city like this, you know, city bikes and rental scooters could really elevate the pressure and the stress of people commuting, and even bring back a little bit more exercise and health into their lives.
And and definitely, before we go on into our final thoughts, let's also hear from our global viewers. So we asked whether they had used electric scooters and what their thoughts were on it. So take a look at the screen. Leon Teo said, I have not ridden on an electric scooter before, but there were a lot of cases in Singapore of e-scooters catching fire while charging. Anmol Agrawal said, not yet, but I do regularly use my bicycle to move about the campus. Hussein Demir said, I've used e-scooters and I did not feel safe at all. Sometimes having to write in the traffic. I'm not sure about requiring a driver's license though. So these are what our viewers had to say, and I think it all comes down to having safety measures and regulations and better infrastructure, right, Cheska?
Absolutely. And just to give you my example, when I was traveling in Europe, especially in Denmark and Netherlands, they had a very well-made infrastructure for the bike bike riders, so it was adhered to almost as if you are driving a car. The hand signals, the traffic, the roads. So in Korea, there are, as Mr. Kwon mentioned, penalties for not wearing a helmet, driving with more than one rider, not having driver's license. But the penalty only ranges from about $20 to the maximum about $100. So there definitely needs to be more regulations put in place. However, I think the system also needs to change.
The system, all right, and we'll cover that soon after I ask Chihi too. Any ideas on how we can better regulate or ensure safer roads for a lot of people? And why don't you start us off by talking about it in the riders and users' perspective?
Right, so at an individual level, I'd say users must be more aware of the regulations and rules that are related to e-scooters. And if we want to better educate them, campaigns, safety campaigns, as our lawyer, Mr. Kwon, explained to us earlier, must be put in place at the city level as well, because not many people know. I mean, you're a very well-educated e-scooter, because many know that they have to pay for the ride, but they don't know where they should ride them. And parking, it's relatively easier to park.
It really is.
And I see them lying around everywhere in these narrow streets where I have to drive my car through.
Such a hassle.
It's a hassle. It gives headaches. So users must be better educated. They should be better aware, and they should also be more cautious when they're using these.
Right. And what about you, Cheska? You mentioned that we need a better system. Does that mean the government or officials should, roll up their sleeves and think of better solutions for this?
Please do.
Please do.
Because as I mentioned, I gave you an example of some of the European countries, but it's very important that, of course, the users must know exactly what they can do and can't do. But also when the system is set in place as an avid bike rider, for instance, having the right bike path or scooter path, or having the right traffic lights for bicycles, or even, paving the road so that the bikes and the pedestrians are not endangered in the same place. These are very, very fundamental infrastructure that need to be set in place to protect all of us, to be honest.
And I also want to add, because I heard that the city government of Seoul said the bike lanes, which we can ride the e-scooters on, we don't have enough of them.
We really don't.
We really don't.
So the absolute length of them is only 1/4 of the pedestrian roads, which is really little. And we're asking these e-scooter riders to stay on the road or not away from the pedestrian road, right? Then we must accommodate them and build more bike lanes at least, so that they can be used more safely in the city.
You have to think about the pros of riding e-scooters too. Of course, there are these safety hazards for sure, but there's a lot of environmental pros from it if more and more people start using e-scooters. But in order for us to do that, we need better infrastructure, better public education, and better awareness on what type of safety hazards there are. And I hope today's broadcast could really help you guys give an insight on that matter. And we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee.
Always my pleasure.
And Cheska Dain-hong.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.
Mabuhay. I am the Ambassador of the Philippines to the Republic of Korea, Teresa Dizon de Vega. As Korea moves into a more active and engaged position as a global pivotal state, and with the growing influence of Korea in many fields, not just the economy, but also in innovation, in digitalization, in saving the environment, and of course in creative content, Arirang TV has been a very important platform for bringing news and information about Korea to the rest of the world, and also as a platform for talking about and discussing and engaging with other countries and talking about Korea's bilateral relations with the Philippines and with the greater global community. As we move towards a new era after the pandemic, we look forward to more active engagement, to more information, to more opportunities for discussion as Korea, the Philippines, and the rest of the world build a better and safer normal. Resonating with the world, Arirang.